Okay, do y'all have your pieces of paper? Okay, so what I'm gonna have you do, two participants raised hands. Okay, that means that you got it, right? Okay, so write this down. Okay, so in each column, I want you to write what, when you are outside your window of tolerance, right? Like when you're either hyper aroused or when you're hypo aroused, I want you to make a column for what definitely helps, what might help in the middle column, and then what never helps. Okay, so I'm going to give you maybe 2 minutes, and then we'll come back and share. Okay, I'm going to give you about 30 more seconds. Okay, so I'm curious if anybody wants to share, was there anything that surprised you as you did this? This is mine. Don't judge me. Were there any things that, wait, I turned on the chat again. Sorry, I mean, oops, I'm sorry. There it is. So the question was there anything that surprised you? Like things that you were about to put in the always helps column, but then you're like, actually this never helps. So was eating junk food something that you thought would help, but then doesn't help? That kind of it? Yeah. Same, right? Like I almost put in the always helps column potato chips. And then I was like, Juni, that never helps. I didn't write it on the never helps column because that would be knitting. Hot buttered toast, right? Am I right? I put it in the might column because sometimes one piece of hot buttered toast turns into like 5. Yeah. Right? Talking to friends and family might help. For real, right? So I think that's what's, for me, this is the problem with so many of these, kind of BuzzFeed lists that we're getting, is that they're too one size fits all, right? Because I know for a fact that for some of you, being at home may put you into that hyper arousal mode. I know it would put me in hyper arousal. So somebody's asking me what square breathing is. So I was just reminded of it this morning. I was in another meeting where we had, we were led through a square breathing technique. And I am also like really, like I roll my eyes when somebody tells me we're going to do guided meditation or anything like that. I'm super skeptical. But square breathing is actually something that does help me. And so what square breathing is you just think of a square as you're breathing, and you're going to take, breathe, you're going to inhale for 4 counts, hold it for 4 counts, exhale for 4 counts, and then hold it for 4 counts. Okay, so do you all want to just try it real quick? If one of you says yes, I'll try it. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll count you through it. So if you want to just kind of get yourself as grounded as you can, maybe put your feet on the ground, that always helps me. So I'm going to count inhale for 4, hold for 4, exhale for 4, hold for 4. Okay, so here we go. 2, 3, 4. Inhale, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, exhale, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, inhale, 2, 3, 4, exhale, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, inhale, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, exhale, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2. So, right, not rocket science, right? But I think what it reminds me of is when I'm, especially when I'm hyper aroused, I hold my breath, right? I know I hold my breath and I breathe very shallow. And just from, doing this exercise with so many students, I know that, like, I can tell that they're like annoyed by it at first, but then, like, if I do it for, like, I usually kind of take them through like 5 or 6 cycles. By the end, you can see like everything start to go back into that window tolerance, right? Like you can see their shoulders relax and everything. So it's an easy one that you can do with yourself. There's like my watch constantly, like, my watch is very bossy, and it tells me things like drink more water and stand up, but it also tells me to breathe, right? So whatever you need to do to kind of remind yourself to check in with those things to get you back into that window of tolerance, I think is great. So Kelsey, I have an idea. Like, is there an Adulting 101 like Instagram or anything?
There isn't, but we could post it on the Associated Students Instagram.
See? So wouldn't it be cool if you're willing to share your sheet? Because I can guarantee you that some people were like hot buttered toast. I never thought of that, right? So if you're willing to share, how would they do that, Kelsey?
Yeah, absolutely. You could use the hashtag just AS Chico State and then just tag the AS Chico State Instagram in your post. That'd be awesome.
Okay, I didn't understand any of what you just said, but do what Kelsey said because you probably
I'll type it in the chat as well.
Okay, but so my point of this is that I want you to make it personal to you, right? Nothing is going to work if you already know that, right? Like no list that I gave you is going to be as good as what you came up with on your own. But what I want you to think about is, right, like the things that I've been doing, like that rage, panic scrolling of Twitter and Facebook, I actually, like, it's exactly what I did after the fire. And I started doing it with this pandemic thing. And I'm like, Juni, you gotta stop doing that, right? You gotta stop doing that because it never, ever helps. And yet I was spending most of my time. Okay? All right, well, thank you. Okay, so next one. Next slide. Okay, so the next thing that I really want to emphasize is I feel like everybody is in this zone right now where they feel this pressure to live their best, pandemic life, right? So you know, like I said, I'm seeing like all of these lists. I'm like 100 things to do. Oh my God, there's so many things to do, right? If you guys can look this up, has anybody seen this guy's little video that he did? It's hilarious. And he just talks about like how many, you know, loaves of sourdough bread he's been baking, and now he's written his second novel, and all of these, you know, crazy things that none of us are going to do. Well, I should say most of us. And if you are doing it, props to you. Just don't tell me about it because it'll just make me feel bad for myself. Okay? So, there's this great book that I recommend called Emotional Equations by Chip Connolly, and I use it quite often because I think he does just this beautiful job of taking, you know, kind of emotions and then really helping us understand them. So I love this idea of thriving is the frequency of negative events over the frequency of positive events, right? So what we're saying is that we want fewer negative events at the top of that ratio to positive events. So as you look at this, and if you remember that picture of that bridge that I showed you, does it feel like there were more negative events that were coming down than positive events? Because I think that's how many of us are feeling, right? And so I don't know that thriving, I think some of us are getting there and we can, but what this equation reminded me of is that we've got to, you know, really start boosting the number of those positive events because we've got a whole lot of negative events that we can't control right now. So I just wanted to put this up here because I think like there's this, you know, we're using that word resilience a lot right now to kind of as code for like if we all just sucked it up, then everything would be fine. And I don't think that's fair, and I don't think it's realistic. But I also know that I think we can get to a place where we can thrive if we are able to increase this frequency of positive events, right? So sometimes, right, when you're living through the crisis, this might be all you can do. And I guess I just want, for what it's worth, to validate that if this is all you're doing right now, good on you, right? Because that is something that that will get you through the day so you can get to the next day, right? Where maybe you will have a few more positive events. So, do you remember this picture that I showed you a few slides ago? This window of tolerance, the zone of hyperarousal and hypoarousal. I also want you to remember that your instructors are going through this too, right? So I don't know how many faculty members we have in the room right now, but this is something that we are all going through together. And I think this is an important thing to remember because one of the things I am hearing from students and even my own kids at home is I feel like every day is new syllabus day, right? Like I'm getting a new syllabus every day because my instructor is like maybe not even, you know, intentionally trying to change the rules, but adapt very quickly to this changing situation, right? So they are also feeling overwhelmed or they're feeling spacey and numb, right? Because they're human beings too. So some of what I think people are struggling with is we've got people who are living through the trauma trying to help people live through the trauma, right? So this is why I think it's so important for all of us to have compassion for each other as we get through this and to set some realistic goals, okay? So these are just the things that I'm going to recommend, mostly because I did not figure this stuff out until I was well into grad school, right? So some of this was stuff that I learned in grad school. So I have, for many, many, many years, practiced this rule of three. So pick 3 things that you're going to do each day. Only 3. I mean, if it makes you feel better to make out your whole list of everything you have to do and then pick 3 from that list every day, fine. But I'm really going to encourage you to only focus on trying to get 3 things done a day, right? So it helps me prioritize when I'm feeling overwhelmed. And it also, I think, is sometimes important when I'm in that hypoarousal, which is what I'm more prone to, that more depressed side of things, to like set teeny tiny micro tasks, right? Like at one point, it was like just open your statistics textbook. That was on my list of the 3 things to do, right? So I really recommend picking 3 things that you're gonna do every day. Okay, then take one of those things and only do one thing at a time. So this has been a huge thing in our house that I know my kids are getting annoyed with me, but they're like listening to their to their whatever YouTube, whatever they're watching while they're eating, while they're trying to do a little homework. I'm like, do one of those things at a time, right? Because a stressed brain not only cannot be expected to multitask, but we're learning that multitasking is a new thing, right? Like I think of it as like polytasking. Like you might be able to do like many things, but your brain can only really do one thing at a time. So why not just give it permission to do one thing at a time, right? So if you give yourself permission to focus on that one thing, rest assured, all of that other stuff will still be there for you, right? When you're done with that one thing. But I really want you to just kind of experiment with this. Like, okay, when I think of like, I have these 10 things I have to do today, part of the issue is that if I'm not giving myself permission to focus on one and I'm worrying about all those other things, my brain can't do both of those things at the same time. Does that make sense? Okay. So then when you are doing that one thing at a time, you can just do that one thing for 5 minutes. Okay, so if one of my things is I have to read this article for this paper that I'm supposed to write, right? I don't want to because I'm in hypoarousal, right? I would rather just like sleep. That's my thing, right? So what I tell myself is that I'm going to do it for 5 minutes. So what normally happens, right? So I'm doing it for 5 minutes. Oh, okay, maybe I can do this for 6, and then all of a sudden, maybe 15 minutes has gone by. And that's 15 more minutes that I did some reading than when I was just like panicking or fretting or just completely improved. Does that make sense? So this is a thing. It's called the 5-minute rule, right? So if you can kind of put your ass in the chair and write the first few sentences that come out of your head for that paper, most of us actually end up sitting there for more than 5 minutes, right? And there's research that shows that students who are able to tolerate that distress of that first 5 minutes of a task are more likely to be able to get through the first year of school, right? There's some correlation between persistence of first-year students and this being able to tolerate that distress. Okay, so like I said, if you feel like continuing the test for 5 minutes, go for it. Right? So this is my plea to you. What I want you to do is write this down. Okay? Pick 3 things. This is on your second sheet of paper. Pick 3 things, one thing at a time, for 5 minutes. Okay? I don't think it needs to be much more complicated than that, y'all. Right? So imagine if you did this every day, even when we weren't in pandemic mode. I wonder if it feels like that would be helpful. People just want to comment. Or does this seem like too simple? So I mean, I will be totally honest with you. This is what got me through grad school, because I was not I was always out of my window of tolerance in college because I was always very kind of worried that I wasn't measuring up. That's a whole other presentation we can do. But this actually, when I learned these simple things, to just like, when you're under stress, that's the time to simplify, right? So somebody just said it seems manageable and doable, but that doesn't always. Let's see. Seems manageable and doable at a time when it doesn't always feel like that. Yes. So that's the idea, that we're trying to be manageable and doable, right? But what I know is that it's not always going to be easy. right? It's not always going to feel that easy. So when you're not able to do this, I'm really going to encourage you to go back to that list that you made, right? So somebody asked, if you're feeling less stress over time, should we choose to do more 3 tasks in a day? Sure. I mean, what I would recommend is more than doing more than 3 tasks in a day, maybe that one task can be more than a micro task, right? So if your one task was to open your textbook, maybe now that one task is, open my textbook and read the first page, right? Because what we're also trying to do here is to give yourself some successes, right? Because that's really what tends to go away when you're under a lot of stress, is that you have moment after moment and day after day of, like, not feeling empowered, not feeling like you have the will, or the ability to do the work you need to do. And so if we can just start building small successes, and continue to build on that I think is more important than, like, oh my gosh, I accomplished so much today, right? So you can at least say, well, I did, the 3 things that were on my list. Okay? Cool. So the last part of the presentation, I do want to take a little time with, because it's been something that I've been thinking a lot about since, like, I will be totally honest with you, the fire kind of took the wind out of my sails. Is that the metaphor? Yes. It kind of took me down. I was exhausted, and even though I feel very grateful that I did not lose anything, I still have my house, I still have a lot of things. I think it was my bridge was not strong, right? Like, I had not been attending as much as I wanted, as much as I should have, to shoring up my bridge, which is exactly what that window of tolerance is all about, is shoring up the bridge, right? So I've been thinking a lot about, like, okay, why does this shit keep happening? What is happening in the world, right? Like, we're all, just always feeling so stressed all the time. And the book that I always go back to is, or the lessons I always go back to. I'll start with this first. So I am in no way a Buddhist. I do not ever want anybody to say, oh, Juni, let's ask her. She's an expert on Buddhism. If it ain't true, it's not true. But a lot of things about Buddhism do speak very deeply to me. So the first, the key principles of Buddhism are these 4 noble truths, right? So these are the basics. So life is full of suffering. So life is suffering, right? To live is to suffer. It's, and the translation of the word suffering is, kind of up for debate. Some say it's suffering. Some say it's kind of dissatisfactory, right? Like, I'm going to experience dissatisfactory things in my life, right? So suffering then comes because we want things, we desire things, and it stops when that desire or that wanting stops, right? So in order to stop these things, then you follow this Buddhist Eightfold Path. Okay, got it. So this is another way of doing it, right? So life sucks because you want stuff, and if you don't want life to suck, stop wanting stuff, right? So easy, right? But this is kind of the essence of it, right? And I do think that some of this is part of, every time one of these disasters is happening, I go through this period of, like, why is this happening? So what is this? So what does that wanting sound like? It sounds like, I want the semester to be over. I don't want to write this paper. I want to guarantee that this will all be okay. I want to come and go as I please. I want people to understand that I'm struggling. I want it to go back to what it was, right? So, I'm not ever going to tell you that you should not be thinking these things, or these aren't things that you should feel, because these are your feelings. This is it, right? But this is the desire that I think so many people, the desires and the wants that so many of us are struggling with. So how do you cope with that, right? How do I get to this place where I don't desire something, or I don't want something? So the book that I always come back to, I don't know how many of you are familiar, like, if you want to raise your hand if you know Viktor Frankl. So this was a book that I was introduced to when I was in grad school. And if you have not read it, I wish this could be required reading, because for me personally, it helped a lot. So I was going to show the video I was going to show that we're going to skip was just a little. If you go to YouTube and search for Viktor Frankl, there's a lot of information about him. But the essence is that he was a psychiatrist, and he was Jewish, and was like coming into his career just as the Nazis occupied Austria. So he was put in a concentration camp, and he worked in the camps, like digging ditches. But then because he was a physician, he was also put in charge of taking care of people who were sick. And so he kind of started making these observations about the prisoners, that the ones who were able to cope with what was happening and like horrific circumstances, the ones that were coping better and surviving were the ones who maintained some sense of hope, some sense of meaning, some sense of purpose. And that purpose could be as small as, I'm going to steal another piece of bread today so that I can have a few more calories to eat and survive another day, so when I get out of this hellhole, I can go find my family members. Right? And so he writes about this powerful thing, that if we stop trying to search for meaning, that's when we turn to despair. Right? And I think it's always something I have to remind myself, that it's okay to want to know what this all means. And there's not going to be one meaning, and that's kind of his point, right? Like there's not one universal meaning that we all are. Well, I take it back. I do know the meaning of life. Does anybody want to hear it? Okay, I'll tell you. It is, the meaning of life is to give and receive love. So you heard it from me. This is the lesson I've learned. But when I tell people that, they roll their eyes. But it's true. It's corny, but true. So anyway, my point is that Dr. Frankl, I think, really kind of gave me permission to search for that meaning when all seems lost, right? So, yeah, this isn't going to work. So here's another one of these beautiful emotional equations. So Chip Conley took all of this Viktor Frankl wonderfulness and explained it like this: despair equals suffering minus need. Right? Like, so simple, but so beautiful. So the point is, y'all, that this pandemic is probably not going to be the last thing we're going to be dealing with in our short little lives, right? And it's okay for us to try to figure out what it means and what the why is, right? So this is what I'm going to encourage you to do. Think for a second, and maybe given our time constraints, we're not going to share, but why did you come to college? What made you decide to come to college? Okay? Now I'm going to ask you, is that reason still working for you? Right? Because it changes, right? Because your original reason might be, I wanted to get a great job, right? But my question is that still motivating you to do your work? And for some of you, you're like, yes, hell yes. And I think that's awesome, right? But I'm suspecting for some of you, it may not be fitting quite the same. So what do we do about that? If it's not working for you, like you've lost your sense of why, here's what I'm gonna have you do. I want you to think about what makes you angry. What makes you like so mad, right? When you read about it or hear about something, right? And then I also want you to think about, what are you still curious about? And then finally, what makes you feel alive? Okay? Then I want you to go to your advisors and your faculty members and ask them what the major and the job of that is. Because they'll be able to help you. Right? So I will confess that I did not have this figured out as an undergrad. I had, it all worked out for me in the end, right? I'm here now. But I think I did not figure out where the intersection of these three things was until I got to grad school. So I'm just going to show you kind of how it worked out for me. So I felt so angry when I would talk to students and I could see that for whatever reasons, maybe it was internal kind of psychological obstacles or external obstacles that, you know, the world was working against them, that was making it hard for them to explore the potential. I'm curious about how someone's childhood or environment affected their sense of well-being. That's just something I'm very curious about that when I meet a new person, right? And then I feel alive when I'm helping or teaching people, right? And so I figured it out. I should study counseling psychology and I should become a psychologist. Aren't I a genius, right? So this is something that I really want you to think about, and I think it's very normal for it to change over and over again. Somebody mentioned this concept of ikigai. This is exactly what we're talking about, right? That those are this combination of what the world needs you to do versus what, you know, you enjoy doing and what you can get paid to do. Like there's a combination between those three things that I think is really vitally important for us to start looking at. Okay, so write this down. What makes me angry? What am I curious about? What makes me feel alive? And what's the major drama? Okay, because I can't say it enough that I consider myself kind of an existential therapist. It's the kind of what is my why for living is a lot of how I do my work with clients. And I think somewhere in the last 10, 15 years, we got away from that. We got away from asking like, okay, is this actually this course of study or this whatever I'm doing really helping me figure out how to find meaning in whatever suffering that I can endure, right? So there's a Nietzsche quote, he or she who has a why for living can endure anyhow, right? And that's what we're struggling with, right? So in summary, this is your pandemic survival guide, okay? Stay in your window of tolerance, right? Do what you have to do to stay in your window of tolerance. If that's hot buttered toast, more power to you. Please set realistic goals, y'all. This really, you don't have to be extra right now. You just don't. If you're just kind of getting through, and if your goal is to pass all your classes, that's awesome. I just heard this morning that there's a lot of conversation about grading right now, and you know, if pass, no pass should be the direction that we all go. But let's all set realistic goals, and then finally clarify your why for moving school. I really do think if you can focus on these three things, you'll at least be able to get through till May. Okay. So if there are any questions, that is the end of my presentation. But I hope it was helpful. But yeah, if people have a few questions, I can probably answer. This is awesome. So in social work, we decided to give ourselves, faculty and staff, daily pass-fail to lower our self-expectation. Awesome. Awesome. Oh, what is trauma bonding? Somebody asked me that. So trauma bonding is this idea that, okay, I'm going to go to work every day and talk about how awful my job is, right? Like how hard my job is. Oh my gosh, my job is so hard. And every day at lunch, we all talk about like, oh yes, it's so hard, it's so hard. So one day at lunch, that's venting, right? But if I'm coming in and expecting to do that with folks every day, that like it's just like we're all just kind of feeding into that same energy, and that's we're bonding, but it's over trauma, and it may not be so helpful. So, do you have any advice for students returning from abroad? So, I mean, I will say that I think even more to give yourself that grace of okay, I have to simplify, right? So it's again, think of it as anytime your brain is going to be in transition, it's going to be in a stressed mode, right? So if you are stressed because you're like reacclimating to this culture, that window of tolerance is probably going to be a little smaller than it might normally be. So in that case, I think it's even more important for you to like make your list, right? And keep adding to it, right? Like this is a living document. Like some things might move from one end to the other, right? That some things that were super helpful, like watching some funny videos on YouTube. Now that has become the thing I do, like to just like drown out the noise of my brain, right? And that may not be as helpful. Do I believe that this pandemic will allow leniency and acceptance rates for grad schools? Interesting. I don't know. What the observation that I am making though is a lot of the things, the policies and the things that we're changing are things that I think we needed to change in order to be a healthier community in general. So what my hope is that we're not lowering standards, we're actually giving people more room to focus on, doing really good work, doing that one thing at a time and doing it really well. So I don't know that it will be, the GPAs will, have lower standards for getting an A, but I wonder if we're going to start seeing people actually starting to do work that they're more proud of. I hope. Okay, do I have other resources for students? Books, movies, podcasts. Okay, so my favorite podcast that I highly recommend y'all, it's called Terrible, Thanks for Asking. And one of my colleagues tipped me off to it, and it's awesome. It's this woman in Minnesota, and she does all these stories of people. I mean, you can imagine terrible things for asking, right? So these are people who have gone through kind of, really hard times, really rough patches, losing loved ones or going through some difficult circumstance, and they don't have happy endings, right? But the point is that you're listening to how they need meaning of that suffering, and I think that's and it's a real way to explore humanity. Oh yeah, can others share their favorite podcasts? I totally agree. Yeah, somebody said I hope school will extend the time frame to complete incompletes. Can I secretly? Can I just tell you? Don't tell anyone I said this, but I don't think incompletes do anyone a whole ton of favors, right? Because I do think that it just kind of extends the anxiety. So we'll see. People have such great things. Grown-ups read things they wrote as kids. Oh my gosh, I love that. Okay, well.
How do you set 3 things to do while you're managing a household and school?
Good question. I think it's even more important to set really, really realistic goals, right? Don't you? So if those realistic goals are, okay, I'll tell a very quick story. So I had my, I forget when it was, at some point in my PhD, so I can't even remember, I had my twin girls, right? So I'm getting my PhD, I'm doing my internship, which is, 40 hours a week. I had not, even really begun my dissertation. And I've got these twin babies at home. And so I had said, okay, I'm going to make progress. I'm going to get my dissertation done this year. And so I scheduled these meetings with my advisor every week. And after one, I was just, weeping and oh, what's wrong with me? I can't get anything done. And he says, after listening to me for 30 minutes, he's like, you know what, Juni, it sounds like right now you are 60% mom, 40% grad student. And I was like, oh my gosh, yes, that makes me feel so much better. And then I proceeded to cry and, just word vomit on him for another 20 minutes. And he's like, I take it back. I think you're 85% mom and 15% grad student right now. And it made me feel like that. Yeah, I was like, yeah, that actually feels more realistic. And so I think some of, for those of you who are student parents or those of you who are back home, helping out with other kids in the home or whatever your circumstances, I think it's okay to really start saying you know what, right now I am 70% teacher's aide, 30% student. And I think we all need to be realistic about that, and we need to give ourselves a lot of grace. Just from, maybe it's just who I talk to and what I follow on social media, but I think everybody's starting to realize, everybody knew from the beginning that, this is not usual. And I think I also hope people realize is that some of us were living this life before this pandemic happened, right? We were juggling a lot of different things before this ever happened. But I do think that if you have those multiple roles, it's okay for you to say, I really value being there for my family. And so it's okay for me, maybe not even just to put school on the back burner, but like, you know, like the burner, like, you know, or in the campfire on the, in the backyard, right? Like it's not even anywhere near where. Okay. So thank you for having me. This was fun. It was not as fun as being there in person, but I'm glad we did it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Juni. Thank you everyone for attending. We had a great turnout. It was really awesome.
Yes.
Everyone keep an eye out. We'll do adultings on Thursdays. Typically in the afternoons, the time is changing, but please keep an eye out. Thank you all so much.
All right. Ciao.